Well, hey, everybody. Today I am super excited to be talking with Dylan Newcomb. He's the founder of the UZAZU Embodiment Method, which emerged out of, as I dig into it, this really rich background in dance, choreography, composition, movement research funded by the Dutch government. And, I got turned on to some of Dylan's work through a number of people I'm in touch with in the embodiment circles, people whose word I take is pretty much truth in that space. And it's a body of work that I know I can't quite do justice to. And so I'm excited that he's here to kind of take us through a bit more introduction to what this work is like and where it came from. And so, Dylan, I'm just really pleased to be talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. So, I gave a kind of whirlwind summary of who you are and where you came from, but could you dig in a bit more for us? Like, where were the original seeds of this work? Because I've never seen anything like it. And so I'm curious, what was the genesis of that?
It's been, before I dive right in there, let me just set a little bit of context. I've been developing this work in its more explicit form, like the seeds of it, probably my whole life or more, but for about 17 years explicitly developing this. And it keeps evolving, and it will keep evolving. As we dig into it more, I'll clarify there's definitely a common core of the initial discoveries that have remained true, even though I've clarified and understood them much more over time. But if I've learned one thing over the last 17 years of being an ongoing, researcher, developer, practitioner, it's that the truth is always, many times bigger than my measly awareness can hold.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful, humbling process. On one hand, to step into more owning it, as a modality leader of like that, that journey that we all have in being leaders in our own life or on whatever scale, right? Of like self-trust and confidence and
Absolutely.
Relaxing into that. But at the same time, that like, wow, it's always going to only be this big,
Yeah. I can't speak to your experience exactly, but when I think about even just the body of work that I'm starting to dig into, it's like, it feels too big to grab hold of sometimes. And especially like the deeper I go into embodiment practices, it's like, you just open up an entirely new world.
And it's endless.
Yeah.
Like the universe, I like the fractal view of reality. And this is another fractal, man. You dive into it and there's an infinity within that too, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So for me, also being a naturally open and curious person, some of one breath within this journey has been opening my scope and narrowing my scope, and opening my scope and narrowing my scope. Like, developmental psychology. Whoa! What am I going to do with that? And I could list like 20 of those type of those things. And at various, if I could have my druthers, UZAZU just gives me a permission to spend my life romping through this playground of embodiment and embodied consciousness and what the opportunity and the richness of that. And at the same time, like that ongoing question for me of, okay, what am I most called to focus on, specialize in, and that, I'll say a bit more as we get into the more specifics about it, but that's kind of where I'm in right now at this. I'm about to sort of launch the next iteration, the next major version of UZAZU. And so that's been a major question I've been sitting with, which is probably why I bring it up of like, okay, I'm very cognizant that I could sort of steer this ship in any number of directions in terms of applications or where to dive deeper on. And it's, at the end of the day, there's no one right answer, right? So it's like, well, because I like this more, because I think it would help more, because it would pay better, pick one, pick two.
It would feel better for me. It would feel truer. Absolutely.
Well, so anyway, that's some meta some meta stuff before the details, I guess.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Can you reword your question if you want to take us there right now?
Yeah, I mean, I know at least for me and a number of people listening, this kind of work will be just a really new experience. And a mutual friend of ours, Michael Stern, was telling me about it, last year, the year before, and I started to dig into it, and I just thought, I mean, even on your website, the people that you're talking with, the experience comes through, and the results of this work come through, and yet the practice it seems a little mysterious to me, but I know it involves vowel sounds, and it involves bodily shapes and expressions, and you tie into a lot of psychosocial kind of research and looking at this personality work, and help us paint a picture of that.
Yeah. A brief note on why it's mysterious. It itself is not mysterious. It's very straightforward, very clear work. When I was starting to share it more broadly, because it was developed in the Netherlands primarily, and then I brought it here I started bringing it here before I moved here about 12 years ago or something. And somebody that was, in the self-development movement, that was several years further into his journey of exploring how to market and share this stuff, said, I think you should take all videos and pictures of UZAZU off your website. And I was like, what? He was like, yeah, you shouldn't show it to anybody. I was like, what? And he said, because from what I hear, people look at it and they think it's Qigong. And they go, oh. And then they already, their mind already fills in a lot of.
They've got a box. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, because I was just on my journey and I'm not a student of Qigong, or I wasn't at the time. I've studied it a bit since. I wasn't even going there. I was like, yeah, but it's so totally not Qigong. But I get it. Like on its face, if I was to just share some pictures of it or some videos and you were to just look at it, that's the conclusion, a reasonable conclusion to make. And while it has a lot of similarities, it's actually very different in its structure and its purpose. So that's why we haven't shown it.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up such a good point where like the external manifestations of a practice don't reveal much of anything in terms of what's going on under the surface. Like this isn't just a series of
they tell you some things,
tactics.
Yeah. So now we can perhaps get more into the nitty-gritty of it. On its face, what is UZAZU about? And then we can get more into the history and the yada yada of it. But UZAZU is a way of, again, you can use it for many things, but I like to use it for, it's a very powerful technique for shifting your state. And what do I mean by state? By state, I use that as a catch-all term for starting internally that gestalt mix of your thoughts, emotions, feelings, energy, state, right? If you just sort of hold that in a fuzzy way, we could call that your state. Now that's from an internal perspective. We could also look at, I can look at the water in my pot on the stove before I boil it and it's just placid, or I could look at it out and it could be like this, so I could look at you and your behavior is giving me indications. I can sort of infer things about your internal state, right? Because of that. Yeah. So there's a behavior aspect to the state and there's an internal aspect. And so a lot of what UZAZU is a framework for understanding and then working skillfully with that interplay between how my internal state tends to spill out into my external behaviors, right? If I'm in a very clear state, it's easy to act very clearly, right? If I'm in an excited state, it's easier to be like this, right? Yeah. And sometimes everybody has their states or their modes, right? We call them in UZAZU modes of enactment. From a sort of a technical point of view, right? That your states that you tend to frequent. I'm a more high energy person, so being high energy is easy for me to get there, easy for me to maintain it. I didn't have a lick of caffeine until I hit 40 because I was like, I don't need caffeine. And people were like, yeah, you shouldn't take caffeine.
You shouldn't do that. You're good with that.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, that's not a pretty picture. So we each have our proclivities, right? Our tendencies for a host of reasons, right? And so those are the bedrock of the actions and behaviors and skills that we more naturally, more effortlessly tend to develop and use, and more easily and joyfully, right? Whether we hold, and then we can talk about the different qualities of the states. And UZAZU is a framework for getting very precise about these qualities of state beyond just sort of abstract, label words. It slices and dices them dimensionally into polarities, which I just sort of dropped dimensions and polarities. We'll revisit that in a moment, but it gets very precise about that at different levels of complexity. So you can sort of take it at a simple level or an intermediate level or quite an advanced level at how to understand the anatomy of your state. And by doing that, you can kind of get under the hood with it and shift it. So it's like, oh, if I just narrow this energy, then you understand what that's going to bring. Or if I can keep it high, but I'm just going to broaden it. I'm going to keep it high, but I'm going to narrow it so it's more powerful and directed. Oh no, I'm going to sink it down because it's a little too pushy right now, and I don't need that. I'm going to soften it down so I can be more receptive, but I'm going to still stay connected this way. I still want that that kind of inquiry, right? So you become really a technician of that connection between your state, your body posture, the way your internal structures are holding the energy, right? Just like if you were to, when you go into a church and you just say something or you sing something, the resonance of that the shape of that church holds and accentuates different frequencies and vibrations differently than a bathroom, right? And have you ever experienced that phenomenon, like when you go into a bathroom and there's one note, when you're singing a song and all of a sudden one note pops?
I haven't. No.
Okay, so it's really fun. Go into like a small resonance space and just go like quite slowly, and you'll find one note in there that all of a sudden is louder.
Huh. Okay.
And that's because there's a match between the dimensions and the scale of that space and the particular length of that frequency.
Okay.
Right? Just like the shape of a clarinet creates a different tonal quality than the shape of a flute or a saxophone, right? The shape accentuates certain harmonics and dampens other harmonics.
Okay.
So, right? So you have amplifying and dampening, creating more resonance or dampening. Each shape that our body takes, and not just on the whole, but fractally, the shape of your eyes, the shape of your feet, the shape of your mouth is a really powerful one, the shape of your hands, especially the points where we have the most nerve endings and the most communication with our neurology. The shape of that creates a resonant system that amplifies certain frequencies or certain modes of energy exchange and dampens other ones. Does that make sense?
That does. And I want to make a note for anyone who's listening to this. You got to see this. So we've got a recording, and you might check out that as the visuals that are going along with these words probably make a lot more sense than the words in and of themselves.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I'm wearing an orange hat, for example. I have no shirt on, and I have
no pants. Yeah. It's a great time.
Yeah. So, in other words, there is a very specific cause and effect feedback loops between energy and space on one hand is a theme I'm bringing into the forefront here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that we can make conscious, first we can start to become more aware of how the shape and obviously the movement is a changing of shape over time. That the shape that we're holding in different parts of our body, globally and locally, fractally, amplifies certain frequencies or types of energy motion and dampens other ones. And no one is good or bad or better or worse. It's a question of balance, of appropriateness, of form, function, fit, right? When you're doing your taxes, like you need to be holding the space in a certain kind of way to sustain that energy in a sustainable way, right? Which is maybe different than being at an ecstatic dance event where, you know, for some people, they go for the first time and they freeze up, right? It's like, oh, fuck, right? The energy.
I don't know how to be here. Yeah. So the impression I get is this is about like accessing and making available to yourself like this whole range of possible experience, right? I mean, range of emotional experience, range of physical carriage and organization. It's like weaving all of these threads together. Is that?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. A word that I've loved for almost 2 decades now is full spectrum. Full spectrum. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that I've gone on a long journey with this. I think in the beginning I was more of the ilk, man, right. Once I got the download of that, of what the research was sort of, in my view, wanting to show me, quote unquote, my first trip with it was everyone should have access to all of these all the time. I want to help people to open up all of these and da-da-da-da-da. And that's evolved over the years, especially as I got to really research how do these states play out in the context of our developmental life journey, right?
Okay, yeah.
So if we take that scale of focus for a moment, right? Not just the scale of within a day, where yes, within a day, I might need a moment of really laser focus, a moment of, hey, let go of your work, Dylan, it's time for dinner, or now it's time to play with your daughter. Like that's awesome to have that capacity to just like, to let my body flow through those different states to be available to the moment more fully. Awesome. But that's also resting in a larger fractal, right? Of I'm in my 40s now. I'm in my late 40s. That's very different than when I was in my 20s or my 30s or much less my teens, right? And kind of like you can play a song in different keys at different tempos. You might hit all the main chords. I speak in music metaphors a lot because I was and vibration is very core to what I'm doing here. Vibration and harmony. It's kind of like, what is the key that all those different chords are happening in? And that's a larger fractal, right? So it might be, for me, when I was doing the research of UZAZU, and even before that, when I was a creative artist, I spent like 15 years just being a creative composer, choreographer. That was much more, if we just spatialize that to give you a taste of it, like that was more, I'll just talk in the lateral dimension. We work in the 3 dimensions of space and then a 4th scalar dimension, which we might get into that detail. We might not in this call. So if we just look laterally, right, we don't differentiate right left in the basics of UZAZU, although of course lateralization is huge. We're not dealing with that explicitly. We're dealing with wide and narrow. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So if I look at my daughter, right, she's really good at being like this, right? Oh, this. And she allows, her emotions can change, her focus can change for better and for worse. Stay focused, honey. Keep doing this, honey. Keep brushing your teeth, honey. She's really good at this. As a creative artist, I was really good at this. Now now I'm a father and a householder, and I've got expenses every month that have to come in. I've got some things that I need to be consistent about in my life that have, that are kind of top priority or high priority. Those more than they were in my carefree 20s,
I see.
And so, for example, now we start to bring in the personality stuff just a wee bit. By nature, I have always tended to be more comfortable with a wide embodiment than a narrow embodiment. Okay.
Yeah.
You can sort of see that in people, right? Like some people, you just meet them and they're like, hi, nice to meet you.
Hello,
and they're just
so-and-so, and it's
and they hold that, and like, that's a solid dude. I can depend on this person, They're they're going to do what they say, for better or for worse.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas somebody else like, hey man, nice to meet you. How's it going? Especially if they're from, you also notice the cultural differences. So, East Coast can be more narrow, West Coast more broad.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or America more broad, Germany, Japan more narrow embodiments. Right. So there's all sorts of different personality, culture, influence on this. Even language, but we'll get into that in a moment, can shape these things. But we're talking right now life stages, right? So now I'm like, okay, time to step into dependable householder and family man, right? So this is an UZAZU in that context forms this really great embodied link for me to hold a key piece of this challenge and opportunity of this stage in my life to go, okay, now is really the friggin' stage of my life where I get to be comfortable with this. I get to own this and feel good with this, right? Yeah. What tends to happen is people who are here on a very general level, people who tend to be more comfortable here, they exhibit certain traits, right? They like to be free. They feel, in commitments and things like this.
They're constrained.
Don't put too many rules on it. And so all their value systems and their lifestyle, organizes around catering to that comfort preference, for better and for worse.
Sure.
Yeah. But then the question is, what are they missing out on as a result of that? They might, I might have been excelling in this, but when I looked at all of the points in my life that were, or many of them that were, going less awesomely. Yeah. They had some quality of like, well, to go well, they would need more of this.
So at least being aware of the ranges that you might not be as well versed in, it seems.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We can talk about personality type, and we could type me as a more, broad embodiment person than a narrow embodiment person. We could also take a more functional standpoint, talk about modes, right? There's a shift in the typology, in certain aspects of the personality typology, from types to modes. Daniel Goleman of emotional intelligence proposed this about, I don't remember, 15, 20 years ago. And when I read it, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. Is that I'm not typing, it's a mode, right? And that goes very well with embodied cognitive neuroscience, which is all talking about one of the 4 E's of embodied cognitive neuroscience is enactive, right? The body is enactive, right? And so that's saying that's a certain thing that the body mind is doing, right? And then you just look at that tendency over your time and you type it. You say, oh, they are a this, they are a that. But if you stay that way, you're kind of in your mind outside abstracting it, and it's kind of disempowering. Oh, I'm an extrovert. I'm an introvert. I'm a that. But if you get granular and you say, what modes do I tend to embody? Do I tend to habitually enact? And then with something like UZAZU, you can get more granular and go, how does that mode happen? How am I doing that? Oh, this is then you get very practical about it. You say, oh, I tend to do this. Not just walk around with labels on your chest of, well, I'm just a this, and a this. What you gonna do?
Yeah. So it seems that, we're shifting kind of from like an observational explanatory practice into definitely like a more sensing and experiencing this stuff. Not just like picking apart and categorizing it, but actually like figuring out what's that felt sense of this.
Right. Just from something more descriptive to something more participatory.
Yeah.
And thus empowering at the end of the day.
You can actually play a role in it.
One of them kind of gives you a way to understand, and very often it's used to sort of excuse oneself.
I'm just an introverted guy.
I'm not a feeler. Sorry I hurt your feelings, but I'm a thinker. Okay,
I'm a thinker.
And you knew that coming into this relationship.
Didn't you type me out? You should know how to interact with me based on this label that I fit. Yeah.
Look at the book. That's how we, that's how we need to relate over there.
And it seems like that's such a comforting trap that people can fall into, is like, oh, I know my Myers-Briggs type. And it's like, that's how I am in the world. I'm just like Charles Darwin. That's my type. I'm like him, I think. And that's how it goes.
Yeah. And Don't get me wrong. I love personality typologies, and they have been. I'm so grateful for have led a life that is, that I've spent so much time researching them, and they've enriched my awareness and my intuitive understanding of people, and how to click in with different types of people. And I know that's been helpful in that way for other people. I'm not saying they've only done harm or anything, but they can, on the way they're used and without the sort of embodiment link, they can perpetuate, like so many things in our culture, they can perpetuate a mind heavy approach, and so they're just another layer of concepts that can sort of clog up our mind that can also really get in the way, right, of our relationship to ourselves and our relationship to each other.
Oh, that's amazing. I love just that shift into like, you can know those and they can inform some things, and then at a certain point it's like, well, what does that do for how you are in the world? Yeah. Like, what does that knowing actually change about the way you?
How are you doing that? And are you doing it just because it's a habit? Are you doing it because it's really what's wanting to happen at this stage in your development? Because it might be, and that's good to know too. Like, oh yeah, then it's, how can this be that, like, it might not have been. Now when I work with clients and I'm much more developmentally informed, shall we say, I'm holding that as a reference. So I'm like, well, to a certain extent, this person's in a chaotic period of their life. They're in their early 20s. It's they don't need to know their friggin' life purpose right now. Like, it's okay.
You've got time to be out there and move. Yeah.
Yeah. Or what have you, so it's not like, and this circles back on that point I was making when I first discovered this, was like, everybody should live this sort of, perfectly balanced in the middle of the yin yang symbol, like, no, like life is a dynamic equilibrium with an emphasis on dynamic.
Across time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you might need to zoom out several clicks on the Google map before you see how it all balances out.
I think that's so key. I mean, especially in like movement community and that sort of thing, it's like, it seems very narrow time scale. It's like the span of a few weeks and a few months. And it's like, what about years? What about decades? I mean, I was a ballet student, so we didn't go through my whole history, but for a number of years, I took 4 ballet classes a day, went to Juilliard School of American Ballet, got into the American Ballet Theater. Like I went the whole 9 yards into the ballet thing, deep into that one. That's very, very regimented. That's some specific shit. I could then by the time I was in my late 30s, I was very judgmental of ballet. Right, because I was seeing all the things that it was not, because it's a very specific thing, It's not natural movement. It's not what Portal's doing. It's not what the Buto community is doing. It's not what I'm doing. But that's at a certain period in somebody's life with the right teacher in the right way. It can be an amazingly empowering thing to learn how to send your body into a very specific place in space, and to know where that is, and to be able to send it precisely in a certain time trajectory. Ba, 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 ba. There's something very empowering about that then does, not always, but can translate across into other areas. Yeah.
This
really is so
empowering.
Fascinating. Yeah. I think you're touching on something really important, which is that like in different contexts, at different times, at different stages, like your practice can change entirely, and that's okay. That's
where this conversation is wanting to go, isn't it? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So it's a question of, I think it's very helpful to hold that space, and as coaches or facilitators, to help people hold that awareness. And when a client starts to go, oh no, this is it. I always try to take that as a moment to say, for this period of your life, this might be just give that little extra, like, steer them away from the craggy rocks of absolutism. And go, like, right now, this seems like it might be a better fit for you right now. Just always sort of help people away from that tendency of the mind to fall into, no, that's wrong, this is right. Like with diet, right? Like, no, I was on the I was a macro neurotic for 10 years from like 18 to 28. Now I see it as one very, useful phase in an ongoing exploration of what diet is, suits me right now.
Yeah, I was, I decided to be a vegetarian when I was 7 years old. I saw the movie Chicken Run. And before that, my favorite food was chicken fingers. And in that movie, like the claymation thing, they get their fingers cut off. And I had this like breakdown in the movie theater. And, that lasted I was a vegetarian for 14 years. And then at a certain point, I'm not sure what shifted, but it was like, oh no, I think like maybe the human animal should have meat every now and then. And I'll try it out and see how I feel. And if it's ethically sourced, that feels okay. And, then people from high school, they only ever knew me as a vegetarian. And they're like, wait, you're eating a steak now? Who are you? What happened to you in college?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Identity, man. Identity is also a fascinating piece of this, right? Because then we come to know ourselves through those forms that have been most enduring. And when those change, then there's that question, but then who am I? And what are my values? And what's my purpose? And all of this stuff.
It seems like a painful process very often.
Well, the Buddha was known for saying life is suffering, wasn't he?
Yeah, had some smart things to say. They stuck around.
One of the richest questions is in that area is what is the role of suffering? Does suffering have a place? Is suffering, that statement, pain is mandatory, suffering is optional? That's a statement that has been used in certain personal development circles, and it has a certain value, but one can also ask, is suffering optional?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to say that to my 7-year-old who's still learning, as we all are, self-regulation. You're not going to say that to a 3-year-old. Pain is
optional.
Suffering is optional. You're doing this to yourself. Like, get out of your own way.
Just change your thoughts entirely like that, and you can let go.
You're creating this reality.
That drives me nuts. Yeah.
I'm all for a piece of it. I'm all for a piece of it. Buddha's thing of everything in moderation, like the suffering is optional. I believe that, well, let me just say a sort of a meta tag on this thread here that we're going on for a moment is when you're dealing with embodiment in its multitude of forms, you are invited to deal with suffering. Like it's inevitable. Yeah. Even if your form of embodiment is let's just say a relatively straightforward form of embodiment of like I work out in the gym, right? Which is an awesome embodiment practice.
It gets you,
suffering, right? Lactic acid buildup, suffering. Delayed muscle onset soreness, suffering. You deal with trauma therapy like I do, suffering, right? Like you need to feel it to release it. That statement, wisdom is born of experience of moments of lack of wisdom, right? You need to develop wisdom. I don't believe that wisdom can happen without suffering.
Yeah. It comes after, it emerges from that experience.
Yeah. It's like wisdom is the flowers that emerge from the manure of suffering.
Yeah. And to a certain degree, you absolutely must engage with the world in ways that you might fail and you might scrape your knee and inevitably you'll suffer. And yet what other choice do you have?
Yeah. Gosh, our conversation is gloriously free ranging. I'm tracking it. Shall we zoom out for a moment? What ground have we covered, and where is our listener at this moment? Are they like, whoa? Are they like totally with us? I have no idea.
So your name's Dylan. You do this
Yeah.
embodiment work, and it's this multifaceted approach. And of course, suffering leads to wisdom. And I imagine people are following along. Are you guys following along? You're probably following along. How does? Okay, so here's a question I'm left with. Maybe we zoom it back.
Fill in some gaps. Yeah.
What does that? I mean, what does that look like in terms of practice? I mean, this seems like we're building kind of the theoretical framework that this stuff fits within. But I mean, you've got
philosophical.
You've got UZAZU practitioners like around the world, and people are like actually getting into this practice of it. And I mean, could you just describe a bit of what that sometimes looks like and feels like? Sounds like.
Let me tell it, because we have the time. Let me tell it a little bit from the historical context of why I did the research and how it evolved.
Beautiful.
When I have the time, that's my preferred method. I grew up in Maine, on a farm in nature with hippie back to the land parents, and spent a lot of time, in nature and in my body, playing, running, singing. I was really attracted to singing ever since I was a kid, particularly singing outside. And my mother was always interested in dance, so she was interested in folk dance and creative dance. So I grew up with traditional North American folk dance, contra dances we went to in our community a lot, folk dance, Morris dance, but also West African dance. My mother was obsessed with West African dance, so I grew up with a lot of it. She used to bring people up from New York and Philadelphia, and she started a dance studio, which she still runs.
Oh, wow.
Belfast Dance Studio since 40 years in Maine. And so I grew up around that, singing and dancing in nature. And so I went off to school to be a musician. But because I couldn't read music, which they didn't know until I got to this performing arts high school, they said, well, we'll let you stay if you dance because we need dancers. They always need boys. And so I said, all right, I like dance enough. I wanted to be a singer, but I was like, okay, I like dance enough. I'll stay if you let me take all the music classes. And so I went through, that was my junior and senior year of high school. It was called the Walnut Hill School of Performing Arts in Natick, Massachusetts. Small plug for Walnut Hill if you have children. Awesome, awesome place. I get emotional just thinking about it. Changed my life because I just been doing it in nature, and that really gave me the bedrock to become, professional and to, make it as an artist type thing. Took it somewhere. Then I auditioned for Juilliard as a dancer. I got into the dance thing, and then they heard my music and they invited me to audition as a composer as well. So I did that and got in, and so I led a dual life in Juilliard. But before I graduated, I got an invitation to join two dance companies, actually, the American Ballet Theater and the Netherlands Dance Theater. And so I sort of tasted each one, and I chose the more creative option, which was the Netherlands Dance Theater. Was a more contemporary, and they had choreographers that were exciting to me. And so and Europe was exciting to me and whatnot. So off I was. Never graduated. I left like 6 months before my graduation, which I somewhat regret, but hey. And then I was 8 years in that company just doing the dance thing. Just like we would do sometimes, we could do about 100 performances a year, just 5 months a year touring around the world, just dancing. And it was awesome. I was also really interested in Buddhist meditation. Since I was 12, I started with Zen, and then at 18, Vipassana insight, Buddhist meditation. The Goenka tack for those that are familiar with. Are you familiar with the Vipassana?
A tiny bit. I've had like a small experience, not anything I could even speak of.
Yeah. Then I got more into the Western teachers, the various Western teachers. Won't go down that rabbit hole. And so I was always interested in, I felt like I had two lives. I had a life which was like increasingly felt monastic in my own space, meditating 1 to 2 hours a day, going on 10-day retreats multiple times a year, leave this all and go to a monastery, and then dancing. And And by the time I was 28, I got to a kind of a crisis of faiths, you know, the faith in my body and the sensual and the aesthetic, and the faith that I was no body, and that there was all that there was, you know, consciousness, and that I needed to let go of this earthly form. And like, I got to a stage where I could hardly have sex anymore. Like, you know, it was just like too trippy. And also feeling like, wait a minute, this is stimulating craving, and Buddha says craving leads to suffering, and I'm supposed to not want suffering.
I don't want suffering. Yeah. Oh,
right.
Wow.
Because who wants suffering? And Buddha's saying, you know, you can escape from suffering. So that's like sold. And when I was in that space, I was not suffering. So the whole notion of body, pleasure, pain, suffering, consciousness, it was a hot topic for me. I was hot and bothered on where that all came together. And so I quit everything. I quit dance. I quit meditating. And I read Rumi. I was like, that was one thing I found that made sense to me at that juncture. I mean, he still makes sense to me and millions of people. But and so I went back into the studio, and just started improvising. Like, how do I want to move? You know, mind you, I'd grown up with ballet and modern and you know, like large stage, you know, very conscious, specific dance designed to make a certain impression on somebody sitting there watching you. That's a very specific movement construct, right?
For a performance setting.
Yes. And, you know, somewhat different setup than something you might be doing in natural movement, exercising in nature. It's just a different, you know, setup, different constellation. Yeah. And, So I went into the studio and I just was like, okay, I'm going to meditate for a few minutes, and then I'm going to start to move, and then I'm going to meditate and I'm going to move, and I'm just going to alternate back and forth. And I found that I started within my very first session, within like an hour, I just started going into something that now I look back on looks kind of like, if I'd filmed it would have looked like Buto or something. You know, just sort of this almost sort of energetically orgasmic, purging, pleasure, pain, you know, type thing. And I was like, whoa, okay. And so I started just playing with that, feeling what is that interplay of sensation and form, and how does my mind hold that, and what happens when I hold it in different awarenesses. And I was like, okay, there's something real for me here. There's something relevant to me at where I'm at in this stage of life. And so I got some grants, just some little grants to investigate that, because I'd been a successful dancer and I made a few little choreographies that had won some prizes. I sort of had this career track that was just sort of happening at the same time. So I was starting to become like a successful, well-known choreographer, like right out of the gate of leaving the Netherlands Dance Theater. It was odd because at the same time, the track that I was really on, although I didn't really recognize it, was this track of like being a body-mind researcher for personal development. That's what really mattered to me. And so the performances were really just an excuse in a way. Like, I loved it, but it was really just an opportunity to be in that space and research. So when I would make a piece with dancers, I would spend, like, if I had 3 months to make a piece, I'd spend 2.5 of them almost just researching. And then, we got to put something on stage.
We got to do something.
And so dancers either loved working with me or were driven completely crazy. Or both. Or both. Because I wasn't just like, okay, let's make a piece. Great. Okay, let's put it on the stage. I was like, but why? What are we really feeling? And why are we doing this? And so then I got a more formal grant to research. I was like, I'm making music, I'm making dance, but it all feels like one language, like different forms of consciousness that are happening. And I'd learned music theory and I'd learned dance theory in practice, but they were two different traditions. And I was like, at the end of the day, it's all energy and consciousness was my experience, was my, belief. Belief born of my own experience. And so it's like, is there not an underlying language or set of principles by which both of these operate? And I want that. I don't want to make music over here and create dances to be seen over there. And so I thought, well, you know where that comes together, a simple way, like how do you research that? I was like, well, you know, when we make vowel sounds, when we make vowels and consonants, when we speak and when we sing, that's the body dancing in a micro form and is making sound. So there you go. You know, that's one very concrete way that they come together. So I brought dancers into the studio for the first time to do this specific research where I just had them make vowel sounds and consonants and see how their body wanted to move. So I'd have people go blindfold, go into the corner, we'd pick a vowel sound or a consonant and everybody would play with it. And then we'd come back together and we'd share, you know, do a show and tell.
Yeah.
And what struck us all was how many similarities there were. You know, the body wanted to mimic what the mouth was doing. If you go, ah, the body wants to start doing that. You know, the body isn't going to go, ah.
Yeah.
I mean, it could, but it's a more complex phenomenon. And so we started then just to research all the ways in which how the mouth wanted to mirror the body. I'm sorry, how the body wanted to mirror the mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we did this with, fortunately we were in Europe, you know, so we had 5 or 6 or 7 different languages in the space at any given time. I'm a polylong, so, you know, I could do that and love language. So we just cataloged. I cataloged like 40, 50 different vowel sounds and all the consonants or consonants from the languages, European languages, and learned a lot. But then I was like, okay, this is so common. It seemed like I could start to, after several months of doing that, somebody would walk in the room, and this harkens back to kind of the early stage of our conversation. And if somebody had a certain like broadness, I could go, oh, that person's going to like the vowel sound ah.
Interesting.
You know, and if somebody walked in and was more like this, I could be like, oh, they're going to like the vowel sound E, right? Or which ones they don't like, or whatever. So we started naturally just talking about people like that and states like that. Like the dancers that I was working with frequently, they'd be like, oh, you know, I was feeling really ooh, and then, you know, my brother came in and he was totally like, ah.
Yeah.
So I was just like, you know.
Oh, this is so fascinating.
And I was like, shit, this is a typology. Let's look at existing typologies and see if we can find parallels, existing frameworks, because this is just so consistent across gender and age. And at the beginning, I wasn't a you know, a practiced pattern recognizer in that sense. So I was looking at all sorts of frameworks, and I wasn't seeing my data. I had just had 40 vowel sounds and, you know, different things. Gradually, I was able to bring that down to sort of principles where we got 8 core vowel sounds, right? And it wasn't until I read the I Ching. A friend of mine said, you know, Dylan, these movements, who was a Tai Chi teacher, she said, you know, these movements that are coming out of this kind of remind me a little bit of Tai Chi. There's that Tai Chi Qigong connection again. She said, why don't you look at the I Ching? Because they have a kind of a typology, right? Each of these 8 trigrams, and you combine them to 64 hexagrams. And those are descriptions of distinct sort of qualities of being or, you know, behavior states, different ways of looking at them. So I did. I looked at it, and I read it, and I was flabbergasted. Because it was like I was reading my own research. It was like their description of these 8 trigrams, Chandler, was like almost a word-for-word description of these, what we had come to call the 8 core vowel sounds.
Oh, that's so
primary colors. Yeah. And so what I was just going was, and that was like this, right? Well, there's and there's But if we're talking about right? That is, they had, they called that heaven or creative, right? Expansive and out there, right?
Yeah.
And what we call right? They call the receptive, or they call earth and heaven, right? And what they do is they break that down into yin and yang. Yang line being solid, yin line being broken, right? Yang being expansive, right? Yin being contractive, expansion, contraction, right? And so what they do is they combine these. So this would be a trigram of, you read from the bottom, so this would be yang, yin, yang. And that creates what they call the trigram of fire, okay? And So then I was like, wait a minute, so we're just making vowel sounds and doing movements and noticing the kinds of thoughts that creates in people, the types of emotions and behaviors. But they're describing that as an intersection of binary states, right? You can translate this as 1, 0, 1.
Ah.
Just a little mind blow here. So Leibniz partially invented the binary system inspired by the I Ching. A friend of his who was in China sent him the I Ching, and he was already sort of slowly going there, but when he saw the I Ching, which they'd been using for 2,000 years, systems theorists call the I Ching the original systems theory.
Uh-huh.
And when you study systems theory, which I later did, if you've studied the I Ching deeply, you're like, yeah, that's what Taoism and I Ching theory says, but they complement each other and enrich each other beautifully. So these are 1s, 0s, and 1s. These are binary states, and you combine these, right? So if you have, this is 1, 2, 3, you can call these dimensions. What's a dimension? Positive and negative, right? It's a dimension with 2 poles, right? Mm-hmm. So these are 3 dimensions that either have a yang or a positive pole or a yin or a negative pole.
Okay.
So this 3-dimensional system gives you 8 possible states, right? 3 to the 2nd power, right? I could have yang, 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 yin, right? Or I could keep going, any combination of these. Mm-hmm. Just keep going. There's 8 possible combinations, right?
Yeah.
Now fast forward. So then I was like, okay, it's only happened a few times in my life. I literally, at that moment when I read the I Ching, I heard a voice that said, this is going to be the next 30 years of your life. Is understanding this. Yeah. And when I hear a voice like that, I'm like, okay.
I'm inclined to listen. Yeah.
And what I'm saying, I'm sort of mixing it up a little bit here. I'm not being entirely straightforward because I'm giving you the condensed version. Some of what I'm saying of how I understand this is what has evolved for me over the last 17 years. It was 2002 that insight happened. So what's that? 15 years ago that the I Ching connection came in. So it's been 15 years of trying to understand.
Yeah.
What that means, or what the opportunities are of that. So really that brought me into what I call dimensionalizing states. Right, which I touched on a moment before, saying that, wait a minute, so and that's what started. That was the spark from the I Ching connection, was that notion of, let's just pick one. When you say like the French, we don't have that vowel sound in English. That one goes like this. This is just my body recapitulating what my mouth is doing.
Beckoning, yeah.
That one, what I realized, it took me years to figure it out, but it's actually stupidly simple, is it's just space. It's just space, right? So this is the sagittal dimension, right, which is up, down. This is the forward, back, sagittal, forward, back. This is the vertical dimension, up, down. And this is the lateral dimension, wide, narrow. And this is simply expansion and contraction in the 3 dimensions, right? And so what I've slowly, embarrassingly slowly discovered is that you can, whether you're talking about body shape, whether you're talking about interpersonal dynamics, whether you're talking about an emotional state, a value, a belief, a archetypal role, you can describe them very handily, very functionally as contraction and expansion in these 3 dimensions. Whether it's a concrete thing, a subtle thing, a causal thing, everything exists and unfolds into being, into space and through space. Right? Nothing can come into being without coming into space. Right? Therefore, its primary unfolding and manifesting is going to happen with some degree of contraction and expansion in those 3 dimensions.
I need to chew on that for a second. Okay, so
I've been chewing on it for 15 years, and I'm still.
So okay, I'm trying to get a sense of like, okay, a thought or a belief unfolding in these three kind of dimensions.
Okay, let's do this. Let's do this. Better to have an example, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Let's take the emotion. Let's take just the shape of. All right.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, seriously, tangential note for the listeners: you'll want to watch this too. Like, go back through and like watch.
Yeah. No, you know what? I don't want to take. Let's just take u and a. Our technique is called UZAZU. Because u and a are the two extremes.
Yeah. That heaven-earth dichotomy you were just talking about a second.
Yeah. And everything else sort of happens as, yeah. So we're going to do this. We're going to say.
I do love the feel of the z in between the u and the a.
Yeah, it gives it a little bit of creative tension.
Yeah.
Believe me, I tried all possible consonants in between. And Z1. So.
Ubabu na uzazu. Yeah.
Yeah. Although in Spanish, they don't say z, they say th. So it's UZAZU.
UZAZU.
Which was always the source of some laughter. You can't please everybody all the time.
So true. So true.
Okay, so here we go. Here is yin, yin, yin. Here's yang, yang, yang. Right? So we have vertical. We have sagittal, vertical, lateral. So this is the vowel sound oo, and this is the vowel sound ah. Okay. So if we look at that, this is just to give you a taste. This is obviously not a teaching, but so I'm going back, which means functionally separating from you, right? I'm going away from, I'm going down, compression vertically. I'm going down, right? And I'm going in, narrow.
Ooh.
So it brings me into a kind of a egg-like place.
Yeah.
Right? We call it cradle pose. And it's like resting as a baby, being held.
Ooh, yeah.
In, right? It's very calming, very soothing to the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. And this is the foundation. This is the seed of feeling, of the sensory, right? From where that seed from which things then flower. Right?
Oh, that's beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I could go on and on about that. I think for now, I should stop myself because it's really about the dimensionalization of space and how that, for right now, and how that then feeds into, manifests through the domain of different aspects of ourselves, the different domains, as I call them, of self. So let's look at the opposite of that. So we're going to go forwards, which is to connect. Right now, I'm in an open loop with my environment rather than a closed loop.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we're in an open loop right now, riffing and touring and co-creating. Yeah, co-creating this episode of your podcast.
And so there's the widening too, and
right. Okay, so we're connecting. Right, we're going up. Yeah, which means what? This is gravity, right? So when we relax our body, right? When we push off, when we resist gravitational inertia, that requires effort. Yes, so this requires efforting, right? And allowing, right? So here I'm inputting willfully, intentfully into the system, or spontaneously or whatever, but I'm efforting into the system. Into a connected loop. I'm contributing. You're contributing.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not a passive receiver observer, right? And I'm not narrow. I'm not saying, okay, like this, boom. I'm saying, our conversation, none of us had a plan for this conversation, right? We're like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this, right? We're in this open co-creative space.
And oh my God, you're right. It just feels like this is the creative kind of, yeah.
So this would be like the archetypal pose of our conversation together.
Yeah.
We call this meshwork pose.
Meshwork pose. Okay.
Yeah, because now I am part of a mesh, right?
You've kind of woven yourself into this space and this context.
Yeah. And to the degree that I feel still separate from that, right? I'm not fully in. I'm not fully participative. I might dip in and play a little bit, and then what does Chandler think about me? what do I want to share on this podcast? Whatever my reservations are, or just nursing my own stuff or whatever, right? Am I fully all in? Or am I so in that I'm losing contact with myself, that I'm no longer, right? That's the balance question.
Yeah.
Right. I'm out here and we're going to get friggin' manic together. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So there's the kind of two perspectives. Can I fully go there and let it be what it wants to be, whatever it is? Right now we're talking about these two. And can that still remain balanced and sort of tethered in first and foremost, its opposite. Each opposite sort of tethers the other one, right? Keeps them flying off the handle.
I was going to say, you could spiral off into one of two great
this
extremes.
One, this one spirals into depression. This one spirals into mania.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Now we start to get, I can just make a little link to understanding states, understanding psychology and typology from a very operationalized embodiment perspective, right? I can look at somebody that is dealing with depression and know that spatially they're spiraling back, down, and in.
Organism is,
yes. So then knowing the spatialness of that imbalance, right? I can look at in what domains is this person needing and available to change those vectors, right? Because for some person, it might be the physical domain, right? It might be going to the gym or, efforting, right? To lift them. And we all know that physical exercise can freaking break people out of depression. But not everyone.
Not everyone.
Not everyone. So maybe it's a value shift. Maybe it's the vectors of their values. Maybe it's the vectors of their beliefs. Right? Where can I help shift those directions and bring more balance into it?
So I'm curious, the idea of the expansiveness in the physical way, that really clicks with me. And I'm not sure, what do you mean by the vectors of their values, or the vectors of
vectors are directions in space. That's all.
Yeah.
So if somebody's going, down, back, up, I'll do it this way. I usually draw somebody facing this way diagonally. So this is them going back. This would be forwards.
Yeah.
And this is them coming in this way. Right? Then they're compacting on themselves. These are vectors, right? So they have imbalanced or excessive vectors in a certain direction or combination of vectors. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And so in order to start to shift the vectors in terms of a value or a belief,
and the way the vectors of the way their energy is flowing.
Okay. Is there
the direction their energy is flowing?
Gotcha. So would you basically propose an experiment to someone to try and shift and have them at least get an experience of a different vector there?
Yeah, great. So this question is starting to ask, how can we use UZAZU to actually shift people's state or take them, to promote balance or transformation, right?
Yeah.
In a way, that's what I hear, in your question. In the beginning, let me couch this back in the historical narrative. Because this is the question that broaches like the real juiciness of where I've wanted to go with this, which is healing, growth, development. Like, how can these things support that? Getting sentimental just thinking about it. I'm just sort of holding different clients I'm working with right now. At any given time, probably at least half of the people that depression is such a common in varying degrees. It's something we all deal with to a certain degree. Yeah. I'm a high energy type, right? So I don't tend to go down into that. I tend to go up. Right? So I'm just not as prone to depression. If anything, then for me, allowing that surrendering deeper down into it. So I have to watch out. My shadow would be more watching out for that reactivity of, and I tend to be also more positive emotion than negative emotion. So I tend to be like, no, it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
And then for me, it's like the invitation is to go, well, let me sink back down into that. And let me like soften and be like, well, no, maybe there is some sadness there. Maybe I do feel sad about that it didn't happen differently over the past few months,
and it's okay to feel sad about those.
Yeah. So for me, and I'll get to the depression one in a moment, it's about first noticing your tendencies, right? Learning those in an embodied way, linked to the typology stuff. And then noticing in that framework of, oh, I'm doing it again. Whatever it is, right? And then you have a very clear roadmap of therefore I might want to try this. Therefore, I might want to try this.
Yeah.
For me, therefore, I might want to sink. Very simply for me, it's just like, it could be something as simple as I'm going to start just by taking those 10 minutes to roll out with my rollers, or I'm going to take a few minutes to stretch, and then I'm just going to lie back and I'm going to breathe. Or one of the major ones is just inhale and just exhale and sink down, and just do that.
Yeah.
For the person in depression, and we came from the question also of how can this play out, not just as somebody's body shape, but as different states, like, because I was mentioning beliefs and values and roles and behaviors. Let me just take you on a quick tour of it. If I was to look at this as as an emotion, right? Each of these, depending on which aspect of yourself we're talking about, not my physical self. We've sort of been taking the perspective of the form of my physical body relation to my environment, right? And that's sort of the fundamental starting point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But then we can look at that emotionally. When we look in the emotional space, this one is pleasure, displeasure. The body moves towards yummy and moves away from yucky. Right? Then this one, where we can just talk about gravity, we can also talk about affect. Sorry, we can talk about pleasure and arousal. Arousal, right? So I can be high energy aroused, and I can be low energy. And that's not yummy or not yucky. I could be low energy yucky. I could be low energy yummy.
Yeah.
I could be high energy yummy, or I could be high energy yucky.
Yeah.
So those are what we call 4 core affects. Now that's not me. That's what, all researchers say pretty much that have dimensionalized emotion research. So what I've done over the last years is I've looked at all the leading research I can get my hands on about emotions and values and beliefs and interpersonal needs and this, and looked at how researchers were dimensionalizing it. And because I have this embodiment piece, I was just going like this and saying, oh my God, that's their dimensions can be spatialized.
That fits.
And, yeah. And in some cases I had to sort of like shift the order. Some of them don't even put them in an order, but I'd have to shift the order of it. And in some cases I kind of just articulate them slightly differently. So in some cases I can just import them, straight over. But then it gives, when you combine those maps with the UZAZU maps of this and this, which we haven't gotten into yet, the neurology of this and why this is so powerful. It has to do with the vagus nerve and Stephen Porges' work, but maybe we'll have time to get back into this. But this is incredibly neurologically potent areas, right? So when you shape these, you're sending very specific—
the hands, the mouth.
You're sending these, the sort of encodings of these signals into your neurology intentionally. Right? So you use those as like supports to whatever you're trying to intend, right? And that could be to feel into it. So I might start to get somebody by going into that and feeling it, surrendering to it, and then slowly starting to, through breath and sound and movement, work their way out of it. Then the question is, what kind of mind space are we holding? What frame are we holding? Are we holding an emotional framework? Are we holding an interactional framework? Are we holding a belief framework, etc.? Right. So emotions, we have yummy, yucky, pleasure dimension, affect dimension, and then control dimension. Right. This is I allow it. This is I allow it, which is also hot. Which interestingly, with emotion, it has to do with I can allow myself to, there's a sense of control.
Yeah.
Here, there's a sense of I don't have control over it. So this is more dominant and submissive. Some researchers have called it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a longer discussion. There's different ways to look at that. So you can understand each of the 8 core emotions that way, right? Mm-hmm. And you can allow yourself then to start to appreciate the function of those emotions.
Okay.
Right? So you start to learn how each of those 8 emotions has a role to play in processing energy and information and restoring balance to either the individual system, dynamic equilibrium to the individual system, or the collective system. Right? So when you take a systems view of emotions and look at it as what kind of balance is wanting to be restored individually and collectively, then it's like, the more you immerse yourself in that, the more you start to see emotions as tools, as vehicles, right, to achieve certain types of cohesion.
Start to find that the larger system find a new way of regulating and organizing itself. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. They're just dynamic forces. And when you start to understand the function of those forces, you can use them more intentionally, right? Sadness. Okay.
We're starting to learn much more in our culture that sadness is good, right? Sadness has a function. Yeah. Sadness, one thing I sometimes say is sadness is the sound that the body makes when it's re-equilibrizing itself after a loss.
Yeah.
So there's something, you lose that something, the body needs to find its new equilibrium without that thing. And so the sadness is that sort of, that rush of water to level it out again.
Okay. Oh, that's, The regulating kind of conversation is so juicy.
Yeah. So that gives you a taste. Right, of how I didn't get into all the specifics of it, but belief as well, right?
Yeah.
So a belief might be for this one, it's safe for me to feel my feelings.
Kind of in this ooh space.
Yeah. It's good for me to feel my feelings. Right? People might have all sorts of beliefs. I use a lot of kinesiological muscle testing to test for positive and negative beliefs. And I have lists of hundreds of beliefs all categorized for each of these things that I check. I have a few standard ones, and then I have my extended list. So when I'm doing one-on-one work, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, read this out loud. Or I might say this, do this movement, say this statement. And then I'm muscle testing on my body, or if they're here, I'm muscle testing on them. Yeah. And we're getting into what and there's different classes of how they respond, right? Somebody might do a movement. Like, let's try one. Are you up to try one?
God, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Let me go. Okay, try this. Hands out here. So wide. Just wide. Lean forward a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Soften your spine down. So it's like we're here. Our arms are wide, and we're looking around this way. So there's a transverse rotation in the spine. Right? Yeah, good. And now you're going to do the same thing with your mouth. So you're going to go E. So that's a narrow. Your mouth is narrow, just like we're going down, wide and forward. E. Yeah. And just say, I feel open to exploring all my options.
I feel open to exploring all my options.
Just notice how that feels in your body, and let your eyes really look around and see if you can feel your neck even looser, so your neck can move a little bit independently. Yeah. Imagine as you say this, Chandler, that when you say the statement, sorry, you can stop for a moment. Making me dizzy.
Got caught up in it.
That when you say the statement, it's like dropping a pebble in the water of your body mind, right? And then your job is not to try to keep like forcing that agenda on yourself.
Just check the ripples.
But just listen to the ripples. Yeah. And then just noticing what happens in response to that. So it's not an affirmation. It's more of a provocation.
Ooh, good distinction. Yeah. Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay. Let's do it.
I'm completely open to exploring all my options.
I'm completely open to exploring all my options.
Okay. What did you notice when you dropped that pebble in?
The closest I can think to describe it, that's something that I'm yearning for, I think. Like there's a part of me that really wants that. And it's like, but at the same time, I can feel something's like, ooh, are you?
Right. That's why I picked that one. I was talking about different categories. This one falls in the category for you. It was a guess. It was an educated guess, but it turned out correct, I think, from what you're saying. Somebody could do it and they could go like, yeah, I want that. I'm in the process of opening to that. It's like, it's attractive to me, but it's edgy. I'm not quite there yet. It could fall in the category of, fuck no, that feels totally unsafe to me. Like alarm gets triggered in the nervous system, right? And that, then if we were to muscle test you, then you'd be completely weak after you said that, right? Okay. Here, if I muscle tested you, it would be a weird signal because it would be kind of like ambivalent about it. It'd be like strong, weak.
And then some people are probably yeah, I am. I'm so open.
I'm totally open. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
Now you could be holding different contexts. It's very incredibly context dependent. So you're right now implicitly, automatically holding the context of your life and probably more certain areas of your life that are intuitively more relevant to this topic. But we could amplify that by saying, I'm completely open to exploring my options with this podcast. That might feel very different than with the direction of my life or, with my relationship with, insert significant other's name here or dating in general, whatever topic it is, right? Yeah. You get a very different response. Yeah. Ooh. And you could take it at a typological, sorry to use that word, but at a typological or sort of generalized level, right? Because some people just like doing this is scary. Like I'm much more this way, right? Than this way. My wife is more this way than this way. So for her, it's just good to work on this pathway in general and good for me to work on this pathway in general. But then it also is very context dependent, whether we're talking again about life stage or we're talking also about, specific hot topics. So when I'm working with people, I'm dancing between life stage, general balance, and just sort of opening up more balancing pathways and really working topic specific.
Gotcha. So this is like,
or relationship specific, like with my father. I walk, you can imagine, I have people imagining their father and their mother a lot. Yeah. And then exploring these different dynamics. A big one that I work with is this, right? Imagine your mother out there and hold this shape. It's okay for me to be my own person.
I can distance.
How does that? I can let her have her, her own emotions and not be affected by it. How does that ripple in the body? Right?
Oh, wow. This is big. Oh, God, we're just scratching the surface. So,
it's a fun playground.
It is, yeah. Dylan, I want to be mindful of your time. I know we're getting toward the end of it, but for people that want to dive into this, because this is just like a playground to like run around and explore. Like, I know you're in the midst of reshaping and resharing, and there's a change within the UZAZU work. But how do people explore this more?
Yeah. I'm not sure how much time will elapse exactly between this moment in which we're recording it and when people start to watch it. But, and I'm also not sure exactly of my timeline, although roughly I am. In the next, right now, as we record this, it's Friday, April 27th. And in the coming 2 weeks, I'm going to be relaunching the website, and I'm going to be announcing a new basic training for UZAZU. This is like the foundations course, and it's at this point in time, this is the only way to learn it. Like it's the only way I'm teaching it, unless you want to come to London and take a 2-day workshop or something. So I will announce a few workshops. But I'm just starting to get back into touring and teaching. Like we used to teach like 50 workshops a year, but then our daughter was born 7 years ago, and I just went, ooh. I was like, ooh. And so now I'm just starting to come back out. So I'm going to be teaching and touring more. And this online course is going to be the foundation of it. Okay. So on the site, uzazu.org,
UZAZU, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. People will see it says the course on the, it'll be easy to find. So if people are interested in it, and I'm going to be, doing a few webinars, leading up to that people can sign up for that and get a little bit more of a taste. Although we actually went into more detail about the nitty gritty of UZAZU than I probably even will in my marketing leading up to the course.
This sounds like people could really dive in with this foundation in place.
What the course does is it starts, the first week is just these dimensions, just really learning and practicing these dimensions. And we're always alternating learning with self-assessment, self-awareness with practice. So I always like to say UZAZU has 3 things. It's a model, right, that helps you understand your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors from a really body-mind point of view.
Yeah.
It's a metric or a measurement system to understand them, because you have a very clear, a metric always requires some third thing out there that you can look at yourself in relationship to.
A reference point,
so you can see how this provides that all of a sudden for something that was really a soft science. I mean, it still is to a degree, but it allows us to go, oh yeah, this is comfortable for me. Oh, this brings up anxiety and aloneness, and oh, this is edgy and I can't relax, and this feels like okay, whatever it is, right? And then we combine those with 8 main poses. So the first week we're learning these dimensions and learning yourself through those dimensions, what your preferences are. Then we go the second week through each of the 8, each of these combinations. What are they? How do they work? And then again, assessing yourself from that more Gestalt perspective. Okay. And then we spend 1 week on each of the 8. So it's just a week of this, a week of this, a week of this, a week of this, so that you can really have time to experience and live into it throughout the week of how it's playing out in your life. And because there's layers and layers of it, right, of how it's relevant to you. What are the beliefs behind it? How are those affecting you in your life? So it's a really kind of a deep, I used to just teach it more superficially. What's different in this is now I'm saying, no, if you want to learn this, like, it's a deep thing. So, when you're ready, let's go deep together. And, because otherwise people, a little bit like if they just saw it as a video on YouTube and said, oh, that's Qigong. If you just learn the movements like this, you'd be like, oh, cool. Or not cool, whatever.
Yeah.
But when I found again and again, when people really put in the time and stay with it, it pays back.
It unfolds. Yeah.
Yeah. Massively. So,
wow.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at with it from that perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, we haven't gotten a chance to touch on your work and what you're doing with natural movement and whatnot. I'd be very curious to continue our conversation and to hear what you're busy with, and then see where these things connect. That would be fascinating, I think.
Yeah. That sounds like we might have a part 2. Well, shoot.
Whatever you want.
I just want to say, thank you again. I hope for everyone listening, I know for me, this has been like just a really rich, insightful kind of thread.
Lovely.
Yeah. And so anyone listening, I do recommend go and watch like the video of this and the expressiveness. Totally different experience. But yeah, drop us a line. Let us know what you think. Like, what stood out in the comments. Drop us a review. 5 stars is always great. Helps more people experience this too. And keep an eye on what Dylan's doing with this. I'm super intrigued.